My name's Funmi. I'm actually doing dance history, so I'm usually used to talking about dance in the past. So I thought I'd rise to the challenge and try and talk about it, what we imagine dance will be like in 2025. Dance is a very wide topic, as you know, so I'm going to only talk about an aspect of dance. So I'll give a bit of background so you sort of know what aspect I'm talking about. So I'll give a bit of background on styles and types of dance and contemporary dance, which is going to be what I'm going to be talking about. And then I'll talk about themes, that's the present discussions going on in the dance world around contemporary dance. And based on what's going on, then I'm going to sort of try and make some predictions about what we'll see in 2025. Dance can be defined by style of movement. So, you know, we've all seen some ballet, contemporary dance, modern dance, which broke away from ballet in around the 1930s, 1960s, and people started saying, why do we always have to do dances about mythology and fairy princesses? We want to do something more about the politics of now. Women didn't want to always be, you know, saints and nymphs and elves, and so those sort of ideas came about, and dancing, exposing the foot was a big thing at the time, barefoot, and women letting their hair down rather than having it in a bun, that sort of thing. So that started. And then later there was postmodern dance which started sort of like in the 60s in America, 70s, and then over in Britain too there was another new dance scene, and they felt modern dance had also become very codified and had lost touch with reality, because no one could move like that unless you had years and years of training. And also people wanted a different relationship with the audience. They didn't want to be high on the proscenium arch, but they wanted to be more on level. So there started to be experiments in the Judson Church in America where people sat around the performers and it was improvised and not all the movements set beforehand. So those sort of developments happened. So those are contemporary dance, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today. Because I'm a student in a university, and in a university you're usually taught, contemporary dance. And then hip-hop, we all know hip-hop and salsa and dance forms like that, which are generally called social dances. Dances that we dance participation and for enjoyment. So you don't have a choreographer that develops the movement. There are choreographers within social dance, but often people forget their names and they assign it to the community. So you say, oh, salsa is Latin and hip-hop is African-American, and you assign it to the group. Within the group, you might know the innovators, but generally there's a lot of improvisation, so you might not be able to pick up who the innovators are. So those are the styles of dance. So dance sometimes is categorized like that. But we also categorize dance by type. Like we say art dance. And art dance is the dance that you see touring the theatres and Pacific theatres. It'll be like the Royal Opera House and Sadler's Wells and the South Bank Centre. I'm sorry, I'm mentioning London venues because I live in London. But those are sort of like, pricey tickets. And if you want a cheap ticket, you have to phone up in advance and things like that, And these big companies that tour the whole world, very, high level of technique, amazing to watch, lovely costumes and all that. And these are the companies where ideas are investigated. So it's either the ballet, which is representing tradition, or the modern dance companies, which are like new ideas. Like in the 60s, you had John Cage, who did, and Merce Cunningham that did chance dance, where they would throw down a coin, dice, and say, okay, we'll do the number of movements that the dice shows. So they were looking at ideas of life. You can't fix narrative and things like that. So it was quite, so that we have that in art dance, and you sort of have to read up to really understand what you're watching. Like when you go and see abstract painting, you don't really enjoy it unless you know a little bit about abstract painting. Then you can sort of understand it. And art dance can be like that too. Then you have community dance. That's when professional dancers go into community, and work with people, and they put on shows. So a lot of, you see festivals happening. That would fall in community dance, where you have community art movement. like you know, the guy on TV, Gareth, the choir master that sings, who's created that would be called community choir, for example. So you go to a professional, go to a group of non-professionals and create art. So that's called community. So you have community dance, social dance, clubbing, parties, that kind of dancing, popular and commercial dance, musical videos, and the kind of theatre which is not high art. So variety show, hip hop dance shows might be called popular or commercial. So these are categories by the use of the dance, while the other category was by the style of the dance. But what's happening now, and this is the changes that have been happening over the last 20 years, is that now we see hip hop, which would have been called a social dance or popular dance, now touring art venues. So because hip hop choreographers think, I would like a bit of that, and why isn't hip hop high art anyway, and why can't it tour Sadler's Wells? And if I do it in a certain way with a certain kind of lighting and a certain kind of costume, I can fit into that category too. So then you see people in the ballet saying, why should I be separated from the people? Ballet is accessible to all. They shouldn't put us on a pedestal. I want to go down to the community and do some stuff in a school with local children as well. So it's becoming more and more difficult to say ballet is art and hip hop is social, because practitioners are working in between types. So that's a sort of a background, that the boundaries are becoming blurred now. And that is also economic. There's economic reasons for this, which I'll talk about later. So now we come to contemporary dance. Now contemporary dance is the art dance, the dance of artistic ideas, investigation, and it first came into Britain in the 60s. Ballet was the established form here, and there was educational dance in the schools, but ballet, if you went to the theatre, most of the stuff you'll see is ballet. But in the 60s, we had the first school, London Contemporary Dance School, established in London, and they started teaching American modern dance, Graham technique, then Cunningham technique, and then gradually it spread around the country. And contemporary dance is theatrical. It's done on stage, people watch. It usually breaks from tradition, it's associated with high arts, it investigates ideas, it requires professional training. It's not something you would pick up, like you can pick up hip hop by just going to a club or something like that, or some of it, but it's transnational. People generally, I'm in Britain, never been to many places in America, but I know most of the American companies because they come into Britain, so it's quite transnational. British companies tour America, tour Australia, so it's transnational. It's usually subsidized and linked to education, and the practitioners are quite entrepreneurial. They're always looking for new places to stage their work. Generally, because it's quite experimental, it needs funding. It's not commercial. It doesn't, you know, people don't just bang down the door and want to watch it. So it has quite a niche market. So the practitioners are quite entrepreneurial as to look for new places to show dance and be involved. And they're usually the ones that do the community dance things. They're usually the people that go into community. They might go and work with disabled people. They might go and work with ethnic minority groups. And they try and use dance to include everybody in society. So that's the background to the talk. So changes, cultural diversity, economics, technology and lifestyle. These are the things that are changing contemporary dance. So before, contemporary dance was associated with white middle class people, and then gradually it's become wider, and you can't really define it by these sort of barriers anymore. These are the things changing it. So what are people discussing in contemporary dance now? I'm going to talk about 3 themes that I notice that people are sort of discussing in contemporary dance. And that is the fusion of dance styles. And now we are seeing people mixing ballet with hip hop and, you know, tap dancing with buto, which is Japanese, and African dance with, you know, contact improvisation. And all the dance forms are mixing up. And Deborah Ray, who's a top dancer, she's the first independent dancer to run her own studio in America, said there's a death to the avant-garde. So what's happening is there was a way that you could say Isadora Duncan broke away from ballet, and then Martha Graham broke away from Isadora Duncan, and then Merce Cunningham broke away from, so there was a history like that. But you can't see a history anymore because everybody's mixing it up. This generation of practitioners, you don't even know whose ideas they're following on from. She says everything's become regional. Instead of thinking that there's a national dance aesthetic, people just do what their community likes. And there's a funding reason for this, because if the government is not funding dance companies that everybody gets to see, then the shows will be related to who in the community, what the people in the community are ready to pay for. So you'll find dancers find that, okay, there's a salsa club, I might as well do a salsa show, because if I do a salsa show, people from the salsa club are most likely to come and see it. It makes sense. So what's happening is that she feels that dance as an investigative form, an experimental form, is dying out. It's not fundable, and it's become regional. And then the promotion of these programs, Got to Dance, Can You Dance, We Can Dance, you know, those kind of programs, talent show kind of programs where you have to do 3-minute slots. You get in there and you do your 3 minutes, and you have to get the audience's attention in 3 minutes, and they have to stand up and give you a round of applause in 3 minutes, has made everything go towards the spectacular. So a Buto dance where you get there and it takes 30 minutes for a practitioner to go from like here down there, that kind of dance, no one has time for it. One of my professors said that they used to go and watch the new dances where someone would get off and on a box for 30 minutes, and they will sit there riveted and excited at the different angles of the body as they got off and on. And, you know, they read all sorts of meanings into this of gender and class, but no one cares about that anymore. So you say it's dying. And the poor woman was sort of slammed on the internet. This was an internet discussion. Like, how can you say there's the death of dance? Is there the death of the book because the Kindle has arrived? You know, dance will always be there. But she wasn't talking about dance in general. She was talking about it as an investigative form. She thinks that time is over. And I put the question, is the avant-garde shifting elsewhere? You know, we're yet to find it. It's sort of gone, but I think it's still around somewhere. So this fusion of dance styles is actually not a new thing. Most ethnic minority groups were into that. So if you look at even in Leicester, we had Akram Khan is the biggie that came out of de Montfort. He's the Asian dancer at the Olympic Games who came out, who danced with the little boy. If anybody watched the opening ceremony, anyway, he was a graduate here, and he fuses Kathak and Bharatanatyam, which are classical Asian dance forms, with ballet and contemporary dance. So it's not new, but what is new is moving out of ethnic communities, the fringes, into the mainstream. It's now being taught in conservatoires. How do you fuse forms? This was considered something that ethnic minorities who are trying to integrate themselves into the West do. But now it's becoming a sort of mainstream practice, and there's certain universities that actually saying, come to our school and we'll show you how to do this. So you have University of East London now teaching hip hop and inviting people to come and teach hip hop in this university, because they're thinking, if we teach them ballet, where is the job? And the new society, the young ones, watch more MTV than ballet. Before, ballet was the international form, but who's watching it now? So it's moving to the mainstream. And I want to show a little clip of a dance company called Union Dance. The Union Dance was started by a South African lady called Corinne Bogard in the 80s in Britain. And because she came from South Africa, she said no to any kind of color barrier. So she fuses everything, you know, in her work. So Union Dance, if you see the full show reel, it starts off, one of the reviews says it starts like a prayer. Their show starts like a prayer and ends like a carnival. So it starts all very slow and all very balletic and all very sort of lyrical. And by the end of the show, they're all doing this. So she mixes it. So that is one of the themes now. Let's fuse as much as possible. Let's fuse. Another theme is the focus on choreography over dance. And this is another web discussion where Spangbergism, as he calls himself, says dance of the future must leave the human body behind and embrace all bodies independently and pursue an object-oriented contact choreography. Basically, let's not just dance with people, let's dance with things. Let's dance with objects. Choreography is not just about the organization of bodies on stage, it's also about the organization of digital media. It's about dancing with objects, projections, and this is Raswabi, an Australian choreography, who's dancing with this great piece of material as well as projections on the wall behind her. And he's saying this, that for dance now, choreography is now becoming more important than the dance. So choreography is about the making of dances and the structuring of dances. And every dance has its own choreography. So salsa is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you know that the structure is you dance around your partner. That's a choreographic structure. But now choreography as an art is overtaking the idea of the dance. Because the focus is not on a specific dance form, and we're watching the developments within the dance form. We're watching really the interaction of dancing of a moving body with other things. So it's now about interaction of the body with other things. So choreography is about organizing all sorts of things together. This also created an online debate with another writer, Phoebe Dance, telling him that, you know, he's crazy, and him saying that he should get her visual artist friends to make a sculpture from the chip on her shoulder, basically. But because he was basically saying dance is dead unless it goes outside this sort of internal use of the body. It has to be more outward. So an example of this kind is very interesting. A lot of, if you put the future of dance in a search engine, hundreds of pages come up talking about the future of dance. And this was on a website, and someone described this as the future of dance. And it's by a German dance company, and the show is called Shadowlands. Okay. So you can see this is a mixture of dance and shadow puppetry. And this is what people are doing to grab the audience now, is to not think about what new thing can I do with my body, but what can I do with a completely different art form. You know, what can I do with something that's unexpected? And this way you can get a general audience and you can keep the spectacle going, rather than, oh, wasn't that amazing? She did this. And last year we were doing that. You know, before it used to be that specific that, oh, this is one dance, but now it's this. And the innovation was in that you vary a movement. But now, no, this is too small for the general audience to be bothered with. As far as they're concerned, that is the same as this. They don't see the difference. So combine it with a complete art form and you have something like this. And this is what someone talked about as the future of dance. And there's a lot more people. There's a show now going on at the Barbican where hip-hop dancers are collaborating with manga comic writers. So they've gone to Japan. It's a Japanese and British collaboration, and the manga comic writer has made these big comic figures and projections, and then the hip-hop dancers are trying to mimic the way, or trying to imagine how would these cartoon characters move, and try to replicate the movement. And then obviously if you're into manga comics and you're into hip-hop, you would love it. And design, you'll go. You know, it's not so much about the dance, it's about how do they interact, how are these elements interacting. Just to give an idea of what the discussions are now, these are two conferences that are coming up in April in Britain, and they're about dance and digital media. How does the body encounter digital media, and how do digital media frame and position the body? So in University of Reading, they will be having a conference to answer that kind of question. Because obviously, if I go on internet, I don't have to use my picture, I can have an avatar. If people get used to the notion of having avatars, then what does this mean for the performer? Does it mean we can start having shows with avatars and the audience now understand this language and this kind of thing? So how do we encounter? What does it mean? What does embodiment, the idea of having a body? It changes with you know, the online, with cyberspace. The other ones, how might digital technologies relate to the practice of training the voice, movement, acting, stage combat, and other forms of performance training? So this is a conference that will be in the Manchester Metropolitan University next month. Again, if you go online, there's all sorts of online courses, short videos on YouTube, how to do that, how to do this new belly dance move, how to do everything, little videos. So now people are teaching and exchanging information on how to do certain dances online. Now, I was always taught that dance is an embodied practice. You can only learn it with another body. So now that's shaken my belief that that is possible. I know that the aesthetics emerging are not going to be the same as when you have human contact. But there's whole now, for example, there's a dance company in London that operates by flash mobs. They just say, we're all going to do our performance at Blue Water shopping mall at 1 o'clock, and they all arrive and they do it. And they're a dance company, it's not just general public. And so they rehearse remotely and come together and see what they find in improvisation. They say there's an economic reason to it, but there's also the fun of it. It's also another way of interacting. And the idea of flash mob is now quite general. A lot of people understand what that means. So they can get an audience. People actually stop and watch and begin to recognize, oh, these are the flash mob dancers, and they can build a following with online presence and social media. So the whole idea of digital media is changing the way people find their audience and interact with audiences, and also what the audience is ready to accept from dancers. These are the possibilities digital media brings up. Expanded stage, so you have not just a stage, you have phones, you have screens, there's different places where you can perform. New body intelligence, new data on the body. So a lot of scientific data on the body is now being used, and I'll talk a bit about that later. Mobile interactivity. This creates new methods of creating dance and new methods of receiving dance. And this is 3 topics that were discussed at Futures in Digital Dance. That was a conference that took place last year. This is an app that was developed for that conference. What they did is they gave a number of dancers a sum of money, maybe £1,000, and they said, you have 2 weeks to develop something digitally. And this instant dissidence Motion Optic App was designed for that environment specifically, and you could look at the app and walk around the environment, and in the app, if you come to a bench, the bench is empty, but the app would project. In the app, you would see someone on the bench, and this is a clip from the website. So that's the person walking, and that's what he's seeing in the app. You see the bench is empty, but the app has a dancer in it. So the app had different small performances for different locations around the location. It's very interesting. There's a type of performance called promenade performances. And promenade performance is when they would spot performers around a location, and then the audience would meet together at a certain point, and a guide, like a tour guide, would take them around and will say, okay, let's stop here, and you'd stop, and the guide will say, look up, and then maybe a dancer will come onto the balcony and do a little performance and disappear, and then the audience would move on to another location, and the same thing would happen. And looking at this, to my mind, it's like a development on the promenade performance. They've taken it into a sort of digital situation, which I suppose the dancer doesn't get tired. I mean, they can, you know, people don't have to all arrive at the same time. You just give them the device, and tell them, go that way, and they go on their own. So I suppose it's a new way of doing promenade performances. Here's another one. This is a Wii console. The interesting thing about this particular Wii game is that the person who developed it, the young man in jeans in the front, is a modern dancer. So that's the only difference. You can get a lot of fitness on. But what the reviewer of this particular game said is that he has sneaked the avant-garde into avatars. So he's trained as a modern dancer, modern dance technique, and he's decided to find a place for it by putting it into a sort of computer game, which people can then play. And this is Kerry Francksen-Kelly. Now, she's our De Montfort, she's our De Montfort person. Unfortunately, I couldn't get her video to move, unfortunately. But she has created two types of performance with digital. She's a senior lecturer in the department here. One is the one you're seeing, which is a strip on the floor, which has a projection of herself, you know, in the same costume, and she's lying on it and she's performing, and you at first you think it's her reflection, but it's a projection, and she's improvising with what her the projection gives her. And she did another one with two performers, and the projections were on the floor and they were dancing with their own projection, which I saw in the building here. She's also made another one which is more interactive. It's for one person at a time. There's a projection on the wall and you have a console and you can actually choreograph what the body does. So if you move the joystick this way, the dancer will either come towards you or away for you. So you can create your own dance. So she also created that, and it was showed in Leicester during a digital arts festival. She said something very interesting about this, and she said that when she started developing this way of working, she found that it made her very sensitive to people's facial expressions and their emotional state. It made her very receptive to that. And the community dance artist in me goes, yes, we can actually use that in prisons. And with people that have stopped, who have become less conscious, or they're emotionally illiterate. They don't, they don't have any. Can't read people's feelings. Perhaps this technology can be developed as a way of engaging them in that activity to learn that kind of become receptive to other people's feelings. Already, dancers work in prisons. There's a company called Dance United. They go into prisons and they do shows, professional shows with the prisoners, and they always get feedback that it really raises the self-esteem of the prisoners. And so I was thinking, oh, that could work. But that's how community dance works. And dance, you keep thinking, how do I make a connection to something else? Last thing, and I'll be quick here, is the other theme. The third theme is kinesthetic empathy. People are there's a lot of discussion about kinesthetic empathy. We all understand dance as a visual art form, but research has shown that the whole body is engaged when you watch a dance performance. I don't know if anyone's watched dance and afterwards you feel exhausted, or you've watched sport. They've all run and you're almost panting at the end of it, even though you never left your sofa. The reason is that your whole body tunes into the performance. So there's a project which has finished now. I think it was funded for 2 years, called Watching Dance, where they were studying audience reactions to dance. And these are the things that they notice: emotional pleasures, interpretive pleasures, visual pleasures, musical pleasures, and kinesthetic pleasures. So all these are going on, and under each of that category, other things are happening with the viewer. And that kind of data actually can be used to create other kinds of events that will involve people. So here we have our dancing engineer. This lady, Katrina Wisdom, started taking dance classes when she was 3, but decided to become the engineer major. So she's a dancing engineer, and she now returns to her university, where she studied engineering, to work with the dance department. I don't think it was a long-term thing. I think it was just a few sessions, and showing them how physics, principles of physics work with ballet. So she was looking at velocity and balance and momentum, and showing that to do ballet you have to work with obviously all the physical, all the principles of physics. So she's a dancing engineer, and what I feel, now I'm going into prediction mode. So in conclusion, these are the three themes: increased fusion of dance styles, increased interest in digital dance, and increased interest in kinesthetic empathy, leading dance to become an increasingly interdisciplinary field. And my predictions: trainings and jobs, more teaching of dance alongside other disciplines. So we have our dance engineer going into teaching engineering students engineering principles using dance. That happens now. People go into schools and use dance to teach mathematics. If I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how many steps do I use to, you know, how many steps is that? People are doing that at primary level, but I think it's going to start happening in higher education. I think digital dance, looking at what Kerry is doing, will start moving into community dance. People use it to engage people more in psychological and social inclusion practices. I think there'll be more production of dance for various media and devices. I think aesthetic appreciation will move into exploring interaction with various elements rather than the body's interaction with the body, if you know what I mean. Rather than technique, bodily technique. Dance histories will be more about economics, community, social and political development rather than innovation. You could say this is happening now and that is a cycle. And as a historian, I sort of look back and think, didn't this happen around 1920? You know what I mean? In a different way, at a lower level. Lloyd Fuller was dancing with large pieces of cloth and lighting in Paris in 1920. I'm sure that was happening. So you could say it's a cycle and it's nothing new at all. So these, if you're interested in the websites, those are them. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
This process of integration also is something equivalent is happening with music, like electroacoustic music.
Yeah, I think it is happening with music, and I think it's happening. It happens with a lot of art forms. I think they're moving in that way because the less they're getting funded as individual, there was a whole push, especially in this country in the 70s and 80s, to make them standalone subjects. And I think the push now is to stay a standalone subject, but somehow also find platforms in other fields as well. So I think, yeah, I think there's a similar trend going on in certain types of music. I was surprised to find out that when cinema first started, they used to have a dancer in the cinema, and because it took a long time to change the film reel. They had these big reels. It could take them 10 minutes to change that. They would have a dancer, someone come out, sit down on the piano and play, and a ballet dancer would perform in between. So it seems, like you're saying, it seems to be sort of moving in another sense back to those kind of mixtures. Yeah, you brought up something. Yeah, you brought up something very interesting. I think it is changing the perception of what interrelationship even is. I think it is. In the 20s, there used to be lots of, maybe not as far back as that, there used to be lots of films where they would have everybody moving at the same time, you know, like, yes, yeah, they used to have that. And one's big films of swimmers doing lots of synchronized swimming and diving, and, you know, everybody looking uniform. And that was the beauty was in the finding the uniformity. And I think now, it's moving away to almost a gaming. There was one, I couldn't get a clip of it, but there was one dancer, she's developed a show where she has a screen with A, take your shoes off, B, run around in a circle, all this on a screen. She's on stage, and the audience all have mobile phone consoles, and the first one to click, she would do the action. So because there's several clicks, she choreographs a piece. So basically, the audience is manipulating what she does, and I'm sure this idea comes from sort of video games. So you find human beings trying to mimic this technology in interaction as well, you know, as well as seeing how the digital can replace the human being altogether. So there was, this didn't get made though, but somebody put a proposal towards trying to get money to create a sort of digital dance partner, which would be on the wall, and then you know, a person could come into the room and dance with this avatar sort of projection, that kind of thing. So how does the digital replace the human body, and then what does that mean then? You know, what's the implications? Where does it go? I mean, I can't actually imagine that far, to tell the truth. So, but I'm sure it has implications, and you know, people will start making things, you know, in that way.
I'm struck by the emphasis on the spectacle, the spectacular, the short attention span.
If you look at the 60s again, when even Raina, she wrote this big manifesto, and it started with the words "no to spectacle." She was a dancer, and she was into minimalism. And there was this is a very sort of American-based thing, but one of her manifestos was no to spectacle, no to, you know, trying to engage the audience on this basis. And people started wearing everyday clothes on stage, and started doing very simple movements. I would say sometimes deceptively simple, because if you tried it, you found that actually it was not as simple, because maybe the formation was tricky, but it didn't look like, you know, you have your leg up here and you're jumping at this sort of width. You know, it seemed accessible movement. And that came as a reaction against all the spectacle of ballet at a particular point of time. And then when Graham started, it was very emotional, and it was still very mythic. All these big stories, pioneer, you know, the American pioneer, the American frontier, these big grand narratives, and they like, let's get rid of it, and we're going to perform in a church hall, and we're going to wear very pared down clothing and do very accessible movement. And it sort of went, you know, that way. And then now we're seeing this sort of going back to sort of spectacle as well. But I find that the minimalism and things like that, the audience has to sort of be trained to see it, trained to appreciate it. And now, because everything, for example, Shadowlands, you don't need a special sort of understanding of the political background of anything to sort of appreciate the form. And so it's going for, dance is now drawing on imagery that is out there already, and not imagery or ways of aesthetics that you have to actually go and study. I mean, when I first started watching Butoh, I was like, what are they doing? You know, I had to attend 1 or 2 conferences and read a few books, and then I began to appreciate what a Butoh artist was doing. But this, the imagery is out, I can access it and appreciate immediately. That's why the spectacle is what's grabbing. And that's what Deborah Way was saying. She was saying what she thinks is going to die is nuance and subtlety and investigation and ideas. You know, what that sort of, and I'm sure there's going to be a backlash. There always is. In the Shadowlands thing, there is a narrative, but it goes with the pop song New York, which is sung by Alicia Keys. Right. You know what I mean? So very short. Yeah. It's a song that's already in the public domain. Anyone who's, you know, into pop music or R&B, they know this song. So there's immediate connection and recognition. You don't have to watch it for 30 minutes to then say, okay, I understand where you're going. You get it from the first second it starts. I think that's where the avant-garde will go. I think that's where the idea, the avant-garde will go. I think you've picked on that. because people will want to investigate something. I'm sure not everybody just wants to do quick, spectacular 3-minute pieces. But I think in order to get the audience, you have to start from what's the imagery and what's in the circulation and how do we draw on that. It can be, because at one point there was a complaint in the dance profession that it was being taken over by social work. Because it was, it was the same thing, and that all the cultural policies were actually forcing performers to become social workers, and people were saying, we're not trained to do this. If someone really freaks out, and to add to that, I think little niches are starting as well, because there's a kind of hip hop called, what's it called? It's from ancient Egypt. Hieroglyphics. It's not called hieroglyphics, but there's a word. It's a similar. It suggests that, where it's all about hand gestures, and and there's a whole community just into that, and they exchange videos, and that's very sort of very Pacific as well. So I think maybe both sort of will develop, very niche and personalized, and very sort of broad and all-encompassing. I think there might be two realms created. Thank you.